welcome to Placecast, a local policy innovation partnership hub production based at the University of Birmingham. Placecast is essential listening for those keen to explore the ins and outs of knowledge mobilisation for influence in central and local government, based on the view that it's only through animating the power of place-based leadership that the wicked problems of 2026 can become more manageable. Whether you're a researcher, citizen scientist, an activist, a professional working within the public sector, civil servant, politician, analyst or entrepreneur, we think that it's through our networks that most solutions can be assembled, tested and the learning shared before we go again, and that universities can act as the repositories and observatories of these efforts. We're based in City-REDI and rooted in the LPIP programme funded by the ESRC, Innovate UK and the AHRC. This podcast aims to highlight knowledge and evidence-based ways of working and the strategies needed to make a real impact on the decisions that shape our society. Our guests are change makers from across the UK, with stories about the ways in which influence can be achieved. We focus in particular on some of the connective tissue within and between sectors for clues as how to animate place-based leadership, as innovating is a team sport best done in the open. Please contact us with feedback on the episodes, or if you'd like to be a guest or have strong views on the processes of advocacy, lobbying, public campaigning and more, unpacking how research and evidence connect with neighbourhood, local, city, regional and national missions. I'm feeling quite pleased because this week we have burst through the 1,000 listen mark, which has really made me feel happy about the podcast. I'm joined today by Glenn Athey, who is a freelancer and part of the LPIP Fellowship programme, same as me. Glenn has a 31 career history in economic development, and he's going to talk to us about projects that he's been working on as part of his fellowship and more broadly, I guess, developing a critique of economic development as practiced in the UK, Glenn.
I guess so, yeah. I'd call it a constructive critique. Yeah, it's always trying to offer constructive solutions or proposals. Yeah.
That's the thing about us economic development people. We are both and, not either or. Yes and people. So my first question is, how did you become engaged with the LPIP and what made you want to become a fellow?
Yeah, well, I've been kind of working in the field for quite a long time, been aware of City-REDI and its work, and really appreciated the great work City-REDI does and got some amazing people working there. I love the fact it combines kind of academic rigor with like real world application within a city region. So I was, I've always kept in touch with City-REDI and always thought, yeah, it'd be great to do some work with them or get involved. And so LPIP came along with a view to bringing alive the expertise and corporate memory of economic growth, economic partnership, innovation, community development. So, and it, I've been aware that the kind of corporate memory for like IE practice and policy has withered, over the past 15 years. So I thought that sounds great, and I'd love to be part of that and input into that. I got invited to apply to be an LPIP Fellow with some ideas about what kind of work I would do within that.
Brilliant. The first question I normally ask is if people have got a kind of whizzy widget or a nice bit of policy that they would like to see embedded. I guess for you, the power of place, the potential for your work reaching maturity and becoming fully embedded would be about partly memory, but also about not having so much stop-start within economic development. Is that fair to say?
It's very fair to say that, yeah, my magic bullet, I wouldn't call it that. It's quite straightforward. Just create a policy environment and framework which enables capacity and capability to be built and also continue. We can't keep changing local and regional policy every 5 years, and slashing budgets, then building them back up again and expect us to be able to do anything different or better. So my kind of plea would be create the framework where we can build capability and learn, accept the fact we will make some mistakes, but we will learn from them and we will improve practice and knowledge. So that's, if you want to look at regions or cities that have successfully managed to transition through industrial restructuring, or they've created like knowledge-based economies or knowledge-based industrial clusters, they've done it over like 30, 40, 50 years with some stability in vision and capacity.
Mm. And if we managed to, I mean, I remember really clearly from back to the old years of SRB5, looking at the menu that we were kind of providing in place and thinking, well, why is the menu so different? Like everybody was kind of happy with the iteration previously. Can you account for why it changes so quickly? Is it a sort of criminal neglect from the centre? Why do you think it changes so rapidly?
My LPIP research project is about policy failure. Why are 4 decades of UK policy interventions for addressing local and regional economic disparities and inequalities? Why do they fail? Is there something systematic in the way we do policy, both at the national level and implement it at the local and regional level? I think it's really it stems back to our political system, that it's built for like being very decisive. It's not built for deliberation, as in for making bold policy choices quickly. It's not built for making the right policy choices and design quickly. So you see a political system that's very cyclical, and it's politically expedient to say trash a policy in the past rather than recognize this policy might have had flaws, but it did some good. Let's build on that and let's improve it. But often it seems like because of the political cycle and national elections and the fact that the UK is so centralised in its political decision making and funding, that we get this cyclical kind of stop start. Like let's just the problem is let's reinvent the wheel. And we've just set fire to all our knowledge about wheels previously.
Yes.
So it's no surprise that that we don't make much progress in this policy area. And I count myself as somebody who just through a dint of clinging on, I call it in this profession, through all the cycles, and just because that's what I do for a living, that I've got quite a lot of corporate memory. And I can see, like, especially I guess in the past 10, 15 years, because I work as a consultant, I work with a lot of practitioners and politicians up and down the land. I have seen, there's it's a lot to do with the fact they're operating with far less resources and capacity. But I have seen a decrease in knowledge. I've seen when this goes to the local level, you talk to somebody in a locality and they say, "Oh, we want to do something about growth business," and that's their starting point. They don't really look into the past and think what's been done before. Sometimes they don't even look at a neighbouring local authority who might be doing it well and say, "Oh yeah, we could probably learn on that and build from it." So I see a lot of capacities lacking, and as well, a big difficulty for me is there's a lot of what I call policy by exhortation. By
Mm.
basically, we're gonna like the leveling up policy. It's language about Greek cities and the Renaissance of cities. It is all just fluff. It's just big talk because unless you actually put the resources, the money, the frameworks to build capacity, long term delivery, an evaluation plan, which none of these levelling up funds had until a select committee basically pointed it out to them and said that, this is, for just good government, you need to have evaluation. And so these were all bolted on at the end. So I think it's, we need to just be a lot more serious and methodical about good policy, that has the resources, has the capacity, has the frameworks, evaluates performance and continually improves. And until we have that, I sometimes I just can't take place-based economic policy seriously anymore.
I mean, there's an awful lot in what you've said. Obviously, for those who aren't as sort of dialed into the policy area, the other thing that, prevents progress, it's not just political whims change, it's the scale at which we operate. So again, in my career, we've had a real kind of neighborhood focus and then a regional focus, a shift down to the city regional focus, which is where we've sort of settled in more recent time. But the kind of criminal waste, particularly in terms of the regional tier, the disestablishment of the RDAs and the Audit Commission in the sort of 2010 austerity round, I think is viewed as just purely an act of vandalism, really, against kind of what could have, should have, would have worked had they been allowed to embed. And also, as you say, the scale of resource that was in the RDA world compared to the scale of resource now. You're right, fine words, butter, no parsnips in regional development. And I mean, levelling up was sort of, in some ways, it was the most highfalutin with the least resource. I think the other thing that is so telling is that if we had a grip on GVA per capita converging, as was the PSA target from 2002, we're talking about billions and billions of pounds of change. You know, the sort of the quantum is so enormous. So the change that consistent subnational economic policy could bring in the size of the prize, it really is about a complete reworking of subnational political economy, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I worked for 3 regional development agencies. I worked for Scottish Enterprise, which is still going, which is a lesson in, continuity. Like, you adapt, you evolve, you change. And I worked for London Development Agency and the East of England Development Agency. I think that, notwithstanding the valid criticisms of regional development agencies, they were agencies of a central government department. They weren't democratically accountable, and so on. Why couldn't that capacity, the resources, the assets have been transitioned into something else? So I went from working in RDA to I was the interim CEO of the local enterprise partnership locally. And I remember the expectations were the same. Like, you're going to be an RDA, but even better. And I was like, we have literally 1/10 of the resources, and we don't actually have a legal structure. When we started, we don't have any permanent staff. We don't have any assets. So I think, again, that for me, that just demonstrates, like, it's the pure, like, it's meaningless to make all these ambitious statements unless you back them up with real resources. And when I look at my big criticism of the kind of late 2010s was that the whole idea of private sector leverage, it was just completely absent from place-based economic policy. And, like, you were thinking, well, the public sector can only kind of lever in change with private sector investment or help incentivize it at the margins, but it can't do it on its own. By not really thinking about how you work with the private sector leverage, you're really consigning your spatial economic policy to the dustbin, because it's just not going to work, unless you're talking, when you're talking about the volumes of investment required, whether it's in place, property, people, or things like mass transit systems or transport, to depend just on the government, it's just not enough money to actually make this transition. So there's a lot of kind of unrealistic policy ambitions. So part of my work is like trying to unpick and say, how have we got here in an objective way? It's all too easy to get emotional and just think, I've spent my career in this area. I wish the government would make a more serious effort to do it properly. But then I'm thinking, well, why has that happened? And it's not just spatial economic policy. It happens in lots of other areas of policy in the UK, just because the political system is as it is. My hope is like devolution will help address some of that. So, like, this whole project is really to try and inform devolution and at least help devolved local government be able to generate some stability, capacity, and capability itself while managing national policy. And so there's lots of examples of places such as Glasgow, for example. They're masters at dealing with whatever new funding initiative comes out. They'll get some of it. They're masters of kind of managing both policy at a Scottish level and a UK level to their own ends, but having that stability, that capacity, capability, and vision, that's driving that forward.
I completely agree that, devolution to the nations as it stands at the moment, certainly economic development, Scottish enterprises, etc., all being extant and kind of rolling on, whereas it's actually in England that we don't have that sort of level of institution. Certainly I've been doing work in the last couple of years on it, is England are losing out in terms of the things that you describe, capacity and capability, partly because city regions with their different speeds are kind of good, but in the absence of a sort of national spatial strategy that sort of is helpful to fit into, in some ways I think certainly Northern Ireland, which spends a lot more per head on economic affairs, full stop, Wales and Scotland do seem to have a bit of a clearer idea of what they're up to compared to England.
Yeah, I mean, Scotland has got some good institutions like Scottish Enterprise, but I've done a lot of work there in the past few years, and there is a feeling that the Scottish government has centralised a lot of policy at the Scottish level, and there's no equivalent of kind of combined authorities or strategic authorities based on city regions in Scotland, for example. And cities like Glasgow are very interested in that. And so I think that And I've encountered that in skills as well, that I'd say in England now, with with those combined authorities that do have devolved skills and the adult skills fund, and with the changes to the apprenticeship levy, they're starting to see a lot more flexibility at the local level, to be a feature, which of course in Scotland, for example, the apprenticeship levy in Scotland just goes straight into the Scottish government's coffers. So they can't
Mm,
offer this new modular training fund and flexible training fund that is really good for the existing workforce for progression, for example. So I'd say that Scotland does have strengths, but what I think what we've seen in England is, particularly in terms of devolution, is like actually it's been happening fast, and it makes the kind of devolved arrangements look a lot more agile than
mm,
Scotland is
mm,
looking. And in Wales, I've done bits of work in Wales, but again, I see the Welsh government, they put out a lot of ambitious policy announcements, a bit like the UK government, but I don't see the how they're
mm,
going to achieve that. And I think that's a big, it's a big implementation gap. Like unless you can say how do you design and deploy the legislative frameworks or the resources or capacities you need to make it happen? So I think, there's a gap there, but my work nowadays is a lot about trying to help fill that gap constructively. Like say, well, here's how they did it in this territory or locality. You know, you might be able to learn from that or adapt from that. So a lot of my kind of work in the past 5 years has been about the how. And I when I work with clients, I say, here's some delivery options that you might want to think about. I don't force it down their throat, but it's a kind of code word for you can actually do something about this.
mm,
There's
mm.
nothing stopping you.
So thinking in that, it sounds like a very quite sobering conversation. I'd like to turn to cast a spotlight on solutions then. So, as you say, with clients, you say you can do this, this, or this. Can you think of an example of something that has worked well, notwithstanding all of the above? And if you just think maybe it was it something that had the right mix of resources, or was it people? Was it political commitment? Was it, can you think of a story to tell about success in economic policy in the subnational space?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I'm picking up my book I'm just about to release, which is like a handbook for local and regional economic development. It's got a lot of case studies in there. So I did some work recently on cluster policy, industrial cluster policy. So the one of the successful examples is like Bilbao
Mm,
city region. They have a they're quite big on industrial clusters, and they
mm,
have 16 clusters, but they really have a very structured approach, and they've been doing it for like 30 years. One of the key aspects is they have a lot of central resources to help manage cluster policy, provide intelligence, provide public co-funding, but the actual cluster organizations themselves are private sector led and
mm,
often lever in private sector money.
mm,
And they sometimes have like geographical locations. For example, if it's logistics or distribution, they have a big logistics and distribution park with they've created like technology centers and innovation hubs. So it's a very long term approach that aims to maintain capacity and capability, that has a lot of private sector leadership built in, and private sector play a big role in influencing what happens. And so to some extent, you might think one of the qualities is like the cluster industry program isn't really dependent on national government. And so I think you often see approaches like that, and that might apply to the UK, for example. Or well, I've always been struck by the success in Chile. They had an organization called Foundation Chile, which used to be basically an organization which channeled US funding to pet projects for the Pinochet regime.
mhm,
And they transitioned it to say, we're going to create this basically, and it's an industrial policy agency. We want to stimulate innovation, new industries. And they continue to receive some US funding, but obviously not tied to any politics, and it received some national funding. And for example, it seeded like something like 6 7 industries in the 1980s, and two of which are like the Chilean wine industry and the Chilean salmon or fish farming industry, which have been really successful. I think the other four didn't do so well, but they said, took a risk, and they sit apart from national government. And so I'm struck by we can have solutions which don't depend on national government. They just need to have the frameworks and seeding of funding to enable them to happen.
So
So
again,
that's
it's a story about longevity and
yeah,
sort of independence from, being kind of hit by every wind that comes out of Whitehall, I suppose. So
yeah.
they're good, really good international lessons. Can you say something from your experience about the ways in which policy moves? So I find, not brilliant at comparative lessons in the UK to begin with, but what might help a policy that worked in Bilbao or in Chile or whatever? How would we begin the process of importing or stealing those good lessons in this country?
I think, yeah. I mean, obviously, you have to be careful that you can't just apply something straight from another country and expect it to work. It's more like how did they approach it?
Mm,
And in the case of, say, Chile, it was, well, a country that lacked any really advanced industries or industries which earned a lot of export income apart from mining, and minerals. And so part of the decision was the need to diversify from just like a primary supplier of minerals and some agricultural products. So I think it's like your lessons are, what's your starting place? Are you in ex-industrial region and you really don't, you have trouble identifying like what are going to be our economic strengths in 20 years? And so the approach would be like the lessons are, well, what's the lesson from Chile? The lesson is you have to look at some of your innate strengths and characteristics and enable some innovation or creativity for people to create some ideas or solutions and just take them where they'll go. And they may be successful or not, and they'll definitely be risky. There'll be some failures. But the lesson from that kind of approach is you need to go on this learning journey of industrial development. And sometimes it leads you to something. For example, in the case of Cambridge in the UK, where it was mostly private sector, but the kind of early personal computers, microcomputing, the BBC microcomputer needed a CPU, a chip, and so they just developed the capability to actually design a CPU in Cambridge, and that kind of design capability then became ARM, the
mm.
chip designer. And so to some extent, so the lesson of Chile was like, government enables it to happen, enables the environment for some people to take risks based on your innate strengths or capabilities or knowledge. So it's more like boiling it down and saying, well, what about this approach could we apply here? And
Glenn,
so
I'll think of you next time I have a glass of Chilean
that's
Shiraz or
it.
whatever. Very
Yeah.
interesting. In some ways, I guess it's easier as your economic development kind of takes leaps forward, maybe to back kind of different trajectories. We're sort of struggling to do post-industrial mix well, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think other example would be in the northeast of England. Like wind energy has kind of built on the back of offshore oil and gas, and they made the expedient use of kind of deep water ports in Blythe.
Mm,
And just so happened that that was exactly what you needed to assemble wind turbines or prepare all the materials for them. And like they developed an underwater robotic kind of inspection
mm,
of initially oil and gas rigs and pipelines for oil and gas, but now it's like electrical cabling. And so, but having said that, on the flip side, if you look at, say, Sunderland and the decision of the Tyne and Weir Development Corporation to actually close Sunderland's deep water, its quays actually had deep water access because they built, ships there, ships hulls. The decision to close that and regenerate it into housing and leisure meant that Sunderland couldn't benefit from wind energy because it didn't have the port infrastructure anymore. So it's kind of, sometimes these geographic features and engineering specialisms, become very much in demand again. And yeah, I think, there's a lesson there.
and there are good green jobs on that coast.
Yeah.
Certainly, I remember when I was doing Northern Powerhouse, meeting the people from Orested, who were saying there will be 27,000 good jobs, but between the Tees Valley and the Northeast, and it just being a scale of investment and kind of confidence that we've rarely sort of demonstrated. But something you mentioned earlier, I'd just like to circle back to about private sector investment. Now, if you look at the OECD tables and you sort of look at the things that real nerd things that I like to do for myself, how do we account for that gap, the private kind of capital gap over sort of 30, 40 years. It seems at odds with the story that certainly we were told in the 80s about kind of private enterprise and all the rest of it. In fact, investment is lower in this country than in many others.
Very much so. Yeah. Kind of my own experience of it is there's a lack of investable propositions
Mm,
that meet the requirements for private sector return. And to some extent, that's due to the expense of capital projects like construction. If you want a private investment in transport, it's probably just too expensive at the moment. The UK has been poor at bringing transport investment costs down, for example. And I think as well, another issue is obviously the City of London, the internationalisation of the UK financial services sector. So institutional investors will look for the best return. The UK financial services sector is international in scope. They have the whole world to look for investable propositions. If the UK ones don't stack up next to other ones around the world, then they don't get invested in. And I think as well, the UK doesn't have a patient capital source. It doesn't have a sovereign wealth fund.
mm,
It's interesting that an Australian wealth fund invested in the M6 toll road
mm.
and is also like a massive shareholder in
The
Manchester
regional
Airports Group.
airports, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
That's a teacher's pension fund, that.
yeah, and also I think there's a sovereign wealth fund based on like mineral wealth
Mm.
from Australia.
Macquarie.
Yeah. So we seem to attract sometimes sovereign wealth or institutional finance from other countries, but not our own. But overall, I think some of it is to do with, investable propositions, bringing the costs of capital projects down would help as well.
Exactly. If you look at the ownership of regional airports across the board, it's always a bit like that. Do you think that things like public sector pension funds could be that kind of patient, stable form of capital, or do you think that that's too risky?
I think they could, but I think we need to listen to, what they want from investments, not assume that they would invest in projects or capital programs as they are. They would have a certain, return that they'd need over a 50-year period. Also, scale of investment. I was involved in some projects in something called the UK Innovation Corridor, which is the London Stansted Cambridge corridor, and that we actually managed to get to talk to some institutional investors and talk about, well, what would it take for you to invest in a transport project, a public transport project or an airport? And they were saying, well, we're really looking at investment at that time in, I think, 2018. They're saying they're really, £2 billion investment is the minimum thing we would consider. And said, even then, £5 billion would be more like it.
Mm.
So, but then if you're looking at UK transport projects, they're so packaged up into little extensions, they'll never reach that threshold, right?
Well, I mean, we did have a good stab at it with NPR a few years ago. The idea of Northern Powerhouse Rail being a single proposition, but it all fell apart for kind of other reasons.
Yeah.
I'm just finding it very interesting talking to you because this is exactly what I think about on a kind of hour-to-hour basis. So you've got some ideas from the rest of the world. You've got some sort of counsel around not changing every 5 minutes. You've got some strong things to say about chopping and changing, political weather. What are you putting all these thoughts into? What are you working on next?
Well, yeah, I've just completed a book called the Local and Regional Economic Development Handbook. So, and I guess the whole thesis behind this was if you were like an economic developer starting work next week in a place in the UK or anywhere in the world, what's the kind of essential knowledge you need to know? And what kinds of knowledge and skills would just help you be really effective at your job and therefore, help your community? So I've kind of been working on a handbook that is structured really as a practitioner would think about local and regional economic development, would think about it functionally, whether that's strategic functions like policy, strategy, and intelligence, or whether that would be like functions like delivery, like industrial development and clusters, inward investment, enterprise, innovation. So I kind of unpack that and have some clarity about what does it mean, innovation and local and regional economic development. What are the different types of innovation? What are some of the principles about using it as a tool for development? What are some practical examples, of successful use of innovation or innovation initiatives? And then what are the lessons going forward? So that's kept me busy for a while, and that's so the kind of next step is launching that next week, and on the 27th of April, and then I guess promoting the hell out of it, I suppose.
Brilliant. It sounds extremely essential.
I'm doing it myself through Amazon because I've got a consultancy business. I've got some help to market the book, and yeah, I think with a publisher, you're totally dependent on how far they push it, and
Mm,
also to be fair, the commission you get on a book is tiny.
yeah.
So it's a bit of an experiment, but I enjoyed writing it, and it was I think 50% of it was really easy, but 50% of it was a real challenge, especially maybe for some like functional areas that perhaps I haven't worked on as much as others. I probably haven't worked on property and regeneration as much as I've worked on enterprise, as a
Mm.
theme. And so, but that was a challenge I enjoyed. I didn't enjoy so much the 10th time I had to proofread it. So, but yeah, that's it. And I've got a few consultancy projects that are coming on stream soon. One of them is to look at the employment and skills opportunities from a major transport investment. And it's from the transport investment. It's from hopefully some of the sites which will become more viable from that or develop. And then it's also about how do you ensure local people benefit from this big transport investment. So yeah, quite excited about that. It's working with some really good people in it and quite a big team.
That's exciting. I mean, the cynic in me says that major transport investment generally south of the University of Birmingham in general, but
Yeah, no, it's not. It's up north.
very
That's
good.
all I can really say
That's
at the
fine.
moment
No, well, that's
until I've
good.
signed
So
the contract.
run, don't walk to Amazon to get hold of the handbook. So I guess over a long career, you've seen them all. You've met all kinds of people. I'm going to ask just now about what I think is a really key skill set, which is being able to broker between different forms of knowledge. Can you think of a specific person from your experience who's a really good broker, able to sort of make ideas move or make things move across time and space? And while you're thinking about that, I think that a bit like a Lego brick, brokers need to connect in with really strong place leaders. So sometimes, and they maybe politicians, or they may be conferred with other kinds of authority. So yeah, a really good broker and a really good place leader, please.
Yeah, I've worked a lot with Professor Pete Tyler from the University of Cambridge.
Yeah,
He was, a legend in all things to do with cities, regeneration, and regional development. And no, not just an eminent academic, but also works a lot with civil servants and does a lot of development work with civil servants. But also, I've worked with him on some of my projects at the local level because he likes to kind of, he likes to keep his hand in at the practical place-based level,
yeah.
and he's very good at communicator. And so it's easy to get on with him because you both love the subject matter and both want it to make a difference. So that's it. Yeah, Pete's great, and really enjoy working with him. Did some policy work with him for the local government association. 2 pieces of work looking at like a urban policy. What should it look like for economic development and economic growth, and that was in 2021. And I think that was the time when his corporate memory kicked in. He said, "I remember the Inner Cities Act in
Yeah, yeah,
1978
yeah.
when the proposal was to have place-based integrated economic spatial policy, and
Back to
that
the
was
urban white paper.
yeah. So that was great. So some of my work now for LPIP is really building on that. And then we also did a bit of work for LJ looking at local growth funding, and that was me and another consultant, Mike Spicer, and
Mm,
we basically were looking at just having a very constructively critical review of growth funding at the local and regional level in the like basically over the past 10 years, and that we did that in 2023. And so a lot of the insights I'm bringing forward into the LPIT work in terms of place leaders, people I've encountered in the past in Glasgow, Stuart Gulliver,
yeah,
who sadly passed away
yeah,
last year. He was amazing in terms of he was he was so intelligent, and he was a visionary really when he saw things that were happening in cities, and he wanted to push Glasgow because he was involved in the Scottish Development Agency and then in Glasgow Development Agency, and he wanted to push Glasgow into the next century. And so I was always impressed with him, and also other people. I worked a lot with Gordon Kennedy, who worked at Glasgow Development Agency, who was the deputy chief executive, and he was the broker and the peacemaker. Like Stuart Gulliver would go in the room and knock a few things over, and upset people, and Gordon would pick them up and
No,
put
that
them
sounds
back
like a
together.
very good double act.
Yeah. Although, yeah, I think, yeah. So I've encountered all sorts of people, and you do need the the robust kind of leaders, but then you also you need people who are good at politics and relationships as well. So you need a good senior management team who can do it all, and
Yeah.
you can't ever expect to find it all in one person. I think that's one of the lessons I take.
That's very good advice. So, just as we finish, I am going to let you, Glenn, have a wave with my place-based innovation magic wand.
Right.
Be careful with it because it can grant you a wish. You can have absolute power to do one of these things, but you must use those powers to make a tangible change to a specific place. Your change will be specific, measurable, actionable, recordable, and transferable. Smart. Magic is hard to get hold of at the moment and is subject to a 20% reducing multi-year budget settlement. So you can have £10 million in a project fund, half an hour with the cabinet and a slide deck, editorial control of the front page of a tabloid, a clause to insert into a bill, or you can have a whole new bill, something simple that can go viral on TikTok, anyone that could be an advocate for your work, or this is one for the real pure nerds, the answer to something that has bothered me forever. So do any of those immediately appeal in terms of making a change to a place?
Yeah, the £10 million would be a great challenge to see what if I could choose. If somebody said, we're going to choose the place, we'll give you £10 million. Can you create something which is going to be transformational? I just think that would be a great challenge. And but I'd really get into it, get into the detail of, okay, what does this place need? What's its opportunities? But I'd be looking for something which I would guess, try and make something fly that involved the private sector as well. I just try and build on an existing strength or something emerging. Let's see how far we can take it, and what do we need to do to make this happen, but also something that would have some great kind of knock-on benefits as well. And
So you
taking on board the need. What's that, sorry?
crowd in some other investments and assets.
Yeah, but also take on board the need for it to be inclusive for local people to benefit. So I think it would be a challenge for somebody. They would say, you say that economic development should do all this stuff. You need to show us how it's done. And I'd be like, oh great, okay, well I'll give it a try.
And just to be clear, a neighbourhood, a borough, what kind of scale would you think you'd be able to be effective at?
I think, yeah, you're talking about a medium-sized city or a quarter of the city, for example. Yeah, not like a full region. It's probably
No.
but,
Brilliant. Well, there you are. You can definitely have that and see
right.
what happens. I've really enjoyed the time we've been speaking. Thank you very much for joining us on Placecast. We set out to mine insights from experts. Well, I mean, you are very expert in this area. You've given us real-world case studies and some practical tips. Then about career advice. Become freelance and never go back, I think is the suggestion. But we've spotlighted solutions as well as waved the place-based innovation magic wand. Thank you very much, Glenn.
Thanks, Nicola. It's my pleasure. I'm happy to talk about this kind of stuff for hours.
Hours and hours. And
Yeah.
rush to Amazon and buy the book as soon as possible.
Yeah. If enough people buy this one, then I'll write another one. I promise.
Backed by popular demand. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks ever so much.